the process I follow creating a tutorial. It's not about how to structure tutorials exactly, things like saying at the start what you are going to teach, adding a reminder of that at the end, etc. Now, the focus here is on the method to produce the tutorial, the broad steps that I follow and that teammates here, people working at GDQuest, I invite you to try as well. So we are going to talk about how to do research, how to work offline, produce the demos, etc. I'll talk about how you want to clap when you make mistakes and clap frankly, so that then you can delegate as much editing to the editing phase and keep the recording process fluid. Things like these. The idea is to help people who want to make tutorial do that efficiently. You want to follow a very clear workflow to do that so that you don't waste time going back and forth between your notes, recording, etc. This is the process I follow after having made hundreds of videos, and this is the process I use to stay efficient, which allows me to run the company, manage clients, do support, do development work, design work, and to produce video tutorials. Although I must say that now we are a team, I don't always edit the videos myself, or sometimes I will just edit one part and delegate the rest to Aditya or Henrique, for example. But still, this is a process that allows me to be very productive. Here is my outline for this video. Even though it's going to be maybe 8 minutes long, let's say, there is little text. Sometimes I might write a bit of a script or longer notes, but most of the time I will focus my attention on the research, experimentation, and rehearsing. The reason I can do that is due in part to experience. If you are creating your first videos, you might want to write a full script, or if you are treating philosophy, design theory, if you cover anything that requires a lot of careful thinking where you don't have a ton of experience, you do want to put this on paper using a script most of the time, or really detailed notes. And more importantly, if you are getting started or if you are covering one of these more intellectual topics, I would highly advise that you give these outlines to persons who are more experienced than you so that they can break them down, take them apart, or outline mistakes. Now it starts with the title or the idea that's going to give me a sense for the tutorial I want to create. Then in one sentence, I try to capture the goal of this tutorial, the element I have to focus on from the start to the end of the process. So the next steps, the research, experimentation, and working out the structure of the tutorial and the order in which I'm going to teach each technique or the technique, the points of the tutorial, they are all going to relate to that core teaching goal. Then, as I'm using org mode, sometimes I will use a subtree for each part of the tutorial, the section, so that I can fold them that way, or not necessarily. Sometimes I will just write a bulleted list. Anything can work, really. You can see that each point here outlines the main idea, starting with a title. The first step is research, for example. And what is research? Writing and collecting ideas, written documents. I highly recommend to not write things like why question mark or how question mark. Write the answer to those questions. For example, instead of writing how to get the tutorial started or how to find ideas, the first element I want to cover in the tutorial is not these questions, but the answers to these questions. That's why my outline reflects that. The first step is research. It's writing and collecting ideas, finding, accumulating related documents, and then you have a short description, a note that I want to be particularly careful about. Same for experimenting. Coding, could be drawing, could be a few things depending on the topic of the tutorial. and then creating the outline of the tutorial. I could have written outline, for example, as the title for this point. Once you have a rough outline for the tutorial, the next step is to do your research, to reinforce your understanding of the topic, to gather information, to make sure that you know what you are talking about. And the best place to find all the information that you need is the internet, isn't it? I highly recommend to work offline as soon as possible. So what I'll be doing, instead of going to the Go to Docs, for example, I will build my own version of the docs. And I use the make command because there's a make file in the documentation, followed by HTML to get an HTML version of the docs. The J12 is just so that it compiles sometimes a bit faster, that it can compile the files with multiple CPU cores, although it doesn't work too well. It's not going to be too fast. Right now I'm making a clean version of the docs and the reference, so it's going to take a bit of time. Now you can go to Hugo Lulcio's website, it's hugo.pro, or you can look for Godot-builds, and you will find hugo.pro/projects/Godot-builds. There, if you search, you will find the documentation. Now you have ready-made offline HTML builds of the Godot docs, so you want to download something like that. I use tools like Zeal to get the Python 3 reference, for example. I have CSS and Emmet as well, which I don't use so often lately. But I use tools as well like Emacs, where the documentation is entirely built in and offline. And whenever I can, I will use books. Another thing that I do is use a command line program, I'm going to stop that process, called YouTube Download. This allows me to download YouTube videos. So one thing I'll do is I have a function that I created for my shell, which is going to take a list of URLs that I write in a document. So I'll go to youtube.com. I'll search for the information that I need. So it might be, let's say we want to have something about design, platform game, those kinds of things. So I will not watch the videos directly. I'll try to find some topics, some videos that seem interesting, breaking down the level design in Celeste. If I'm working on a platformer, maybe I want that. So I'll click on the thumbnail, right click, copy the link location, and I will go back to my file, paste the URLs, one on each line. Then my script will process each of the lines in there and try to download the corresponding video. So I do that to work offline as much as possible. I'll go to my download folder to show you that, and I will do YouTube, it's download all, just that, and it's going to take everything I put in that file and start to download the videos. Then I close Firefox, and the thing I do is this: I go offline, turn everything off. I don't want notifications, I don't want emails, I don't want anything getting in the way of my work, and I'll start working with my offline resources. I also have an offline folder where I do have some downloaded HTML pages, things that are converted to PDFs, those kinds of things. I will use whatever. Sometimes I will even collect these links when I'm on the go. So one day I will write the ideas for tutorials. When I'm out walking, I will search for links and resources on my phone, collect them, and back at the desk I will just download everything and start working offline. The next step is experimentation. Experimentation depends on what you are going to teach, and the research as well. Sometimes they are one and the same thing. By experimentation, I mean playing with the code, trying to implement what you are going to teach in the case of development, creating sketches if you are going to cover game art, and make sure that you can cover the tutorial the way you expected, or discover the things that are going to be difficult about the topic you are going to teach. stumble upon a few mistakes or roadblocks that you can then cover in the tutorial, those kinds of things. The duration of the research and of the experimentation will vary a lot from project to project and from topic to topic. Covering how a certain feature works depends on the feature, but some require very little time. For example, the tutorials about using the battery name feature in the editor, the experimentation was just testing all of the options here. This is the kind of thing that we're going to do. But for example, in the previous course, remaking the first chapter involved getting feedback from the backers and the people who got the course to know what was not working, and making 2 complete versions of the project with different programming patterns before picking one that felt like it worked best for us. The point of the experimentation phase is to figure out some limitations of what you are going to teach to ensure that what you want to teach works as you'd expect, to find maybe a better technique or an alternative. Also, you may bump into some roadblocks, find some obstacles in the code, or find parts that are particularly difficult, and you want to be able to cover these in the tutorial as well, to warn the viewer about what they might struggle with or the most common mistakes. And then it's time to work on the final outline for your tutorial. You want to take all the notes you might have taken during the research process, or you can write everything at this point as well. You're going to expand on and clean up your rough notes, but also do things like these. I use the features in my editor to quickly reorganize the broad steps I've written down. I can do that with lists very easily, and I can also do that with nodes. So if I feel, it's just an example, but if I feel like I should teach editing before recording, so that, let's say, you can better understand why we record in a certain way with the claps, etc. We're going to see that in a second. I could change the order of my notes like that. And I'm not too precious about my outline. If during the recording process I feel like there are some mistakes in there, then I might, at the last moment, change some things, add some shots, etc. You want to get the main structure down and to know what you are going to talk about really well at this point, but you can always be open for some improvements, minor or substantial. Before recording, you want to warm up your voice with a few exercises. Use tongue twisters in English or in the language you are going to speak. You want to do a few things as well to warm up the lips, the tongue, the muscles that are going to operate your jaw, and to warm up the muscles in the throat as well, which are going to make your vocal cords vibrate. For the lips, this works well. For the tongue, you want to do also big la 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 bo 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 bo. I took these from a TED conference, but these are not the only ones. You can do wow 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 wow, all kinds of sounds that require you to move your muscles in an exaggerated way. You don't even have to make sounds. You can just work on relaxing the jaw at first, like so, those kinds of moves for a little while. Then an exercise that works really well is the siren. It's going wee, wee, wee. It warms you up super fast, so before a conference or something like that. On top of that, it makes people laugh or look at you funny, so it's always a nice experience. I know that my former neighbors, when I had an office, were quite fond of that one. You can do a bit of singing as well, the vocal warm-ups as well for that, and then tongue twisters, things like Sister Susie sat on the seashore, sing shirts for sailors. Sister Susie sat on the seashore, sing shirts for sailors. If you want to repeat the same sentence in a cycle, starting slowly, if you struggle to do it as a non-native speaker, it can be quite challenging, and accelerating as you get more comfortable, and looping, more importantly, over the same sentence. You have others like Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. If Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, was the peck of pickled peppers that Peter Piper picked? Those kinds of things. That's it, at least for the basics. Now you have everything in place, it's time to record. First thing, only drink water, and yes, this is water as well. Lots of water. I invite you to prepare enough and to sip on small amounts of water every time you're starting to feel a bit dry and to have a harder time to talk. And this is the second tip, when you do those kinds of things, to make it easy to find for you when editing or for the editor, clap, and clap well. Don't do a small thing like that. The whole point is to be able to see a vertical line on the waveform so that visually straight when you get started with the editing, on the first pass you can just jump to these spikes, or you can advance linearly, but every time you see a spike on the audio waveform, you jump ahead and then you can double check from when to when you want to cut at this point. Silences can also help, so taking the time to not say anything, like so. Because same thing on the final audio, the absence of sound on the waveform will tell you that there's nothing happening, and so that there's something to edit out. It's important once again to use editing. You record when you record, so it's okay to have mistakes in, unless you really say something completely wrong and you have to start over. But if you mess up a sentence, you clap and you redo it. Let's take an example. So say I want to say that you have to drink water. Yeah, you have to drink only water when creating these tutorials. So that's an example of a mistake, a clap, and something that will be very easy for the editor to remove. And if you mess up that sentence 3 times, 4 times, and clap every time like so, it's very easy, as you will see kind of the same shape on the waveform. So then you can jump ahead after every clap and notice that you start with the same word, so you can quickly remove the entire chunk and ripple your edits and keep going. Regarding drinks, you don't want to drink coffee, tea, those kinds of things, because they tend to leave some residue on your palate that will make it a little harder to articulate, or they can dehydrate you, which will produce mouth noises in the final recording. This is also why you want to keep drinking water. Helps to articulate, but also to avoid those mouth noises. I'm talking about these. On top of that, be sure to split your recordings depending on the shots that you want to have. If I'm going to record here and on the sofa, for example, these are going to happen at 2 different times. I will create 2 different recordings for that. I won't move the camera while the recording is on to make it easier to see that these are 2 different scenes if you want. But same thing with the chapters in your tutorial. Don't record the entire thing from start to end. You will make more mistakes. It's nice to get some rest for your mind, for your mouth, for your muscles, especially if you don't have a lot of training with public speaking or speaking continuously for a long amount of time. You want then to, if you have an introduction, or if you are first talking about how to create a scene in Godot, for example, you can do 1 recording for that. Then when you start to talk about the code, you can pause, take the time to breathe, to drink, and do another recording for that. This will allow you to name the recording files every time as well, making it easier then to add them to the edit in a certain order that's chronological, and to then edit them one after the other, or to change the order of some parts. If you have a different recording for each sub-chapter or point in your outline, then you can invert them at the time of editing if you feel like something should come before the next part if you should invert 2 points in your tutorial. Also be sure to record in a calm environment if you can, where you won't be interrupted. And very important, don't record straight when you wake up, and don't record maybe straight after a meal or when you are feeling low in general, because you will make more mistakes, it will take more time. These are times to do simple work, simple tasks, and recording a tutorial, because you have to think about what you are saying, you have to look, for example, I always have kind of an eye on the camera. I tend to have an eye on the camera to be sure that I'm roughly in the center of the picture. Even if I'm looking at the objective, I'm looking at both. I tend to glance at times as well. You can notice that in the videos. You want to be sure that you can focus your attention on the task at hand to make the recording as good as possible. A small tip, but this is the trick I use to focus the camera at the place where I'm going to sit, working alone. I could use my smartphone, but connecting every time to the camera takes a bit of time, so instead I'll use a cushion or some object that I can then use to focus the camera from afar. Does the job if you don't have a friend, or if I have to go farther than that, then I'll use the smartphone with the Wi-Fi connection with the dedicated app. One last tip about recording: if you are using a camera like I'm doing right now, or a DSLR, you want to be sure to be in manual focus when you are sitting and standing still, so that the camera doesn't get you in and out of focus. Quite important. I've made the mistake myself. It happens, but that's always good to know. Once I have a recording, or I recorded several parts, I will go ahead and name my files. By default, I get a timestamp as the name. Often, I don't really care that much. If you are editing yourself and the tutorial is very linear and has few shots, just keep the videos like that, put them all together in a folder, and the timestamps will make it so the videos will be in chronological order. So if the editing has to be linear, that's perfectly fine. If I'm going to give this footage to edit to someone else, however, I want to name the files and to stay organized. Or for myself, sometimes I do want to keep track of what each video is. So I will start with a number dot, that is to make sure that the videos are ordered still chronologically, or that it represents the order, the broad steps of the tutorial. And then I will name the video based on what it teaches or what it shows. So talking a bit about editing now, this is how I organize my projects and my files, because we make that add-on for Blender, Power Sequencer. In the video folder, I will have subfolders for different parts of the tutorial. This one having quite a few shots. I want to keep them separate, the screencasts and the live footage. Then in Blender, so if I open the project file, I have a template file where you will find the base GDQuest logo. I'm going to toggle the program full screen so I can focus my attention again on the editing. From there, we have a tool to automatically import all the local footage in the project. Control I. In my case, it's going to be just a tiny bit slow because I'm generating the proxies in the background as I do that. So I'm going to always do these first steps. I import everything. I just set the start and end time of the project. There again, with our add-on, it's you select everything, you do Control-Alt-P to set the preview range if you want. And from there, one thing that's interesting is you can see already on the audio waveform that you have the claps where you have the sharp lines on audio waveform. Typically, I'll level my audio first, so I select all the strips I want to increase the volume, and I make one of them the active strip. Then in the panel on the right, let me zoom in a little bit, I'm going to keep the shift key down and alt to shift to slowly increase the slider. But as you can see, when I do just shift click, even with all the strips selected, it's only going to affect the active strip or the active object. But Shift Alt, well, Alt is going to affect all selected strips. You can see that in the view on the left. And so if I do Shift Alt, I can slowly increase the strip. And now with the new clipping visualization, the good thing is that the claps tend to clip pretty quickly. So you get these red lines that you can use to see where you made mistakes. Then on purpose, I'm going to just give you an example of the cuts. Then I'll start editing, mostly linearly, so I might order the shots, but in this case, just want to show you what is the bulk of the process. It's going to watch the video in fast playback, like so, and trimming and cutting parts. So I'll typically trim the big silences, and on the first pass, I will go to the claps, like here. So here's the way I do it when I clap. I go to the clap, I listen to what's after it, and then I go back in time to the start of the previous sentence. You can spot them thanks to these little gaps here in the sound. You get that with experience, mostly. You can recognize the start and end of sentences more or less accurately when you've edited lots of videos. And so I will try to get a sense for which parts I have to cut by listening to that previous sentence. Okay, so I was just scratching my back, which I have to remove, so I'll do that. Okay, I can move forward. There doesn't seem to be mistakes in there. You know, with experience, I know that I didn't make mistakes that are too important in a given part when there are no claps. So I do that to help the editor, but for myself as well. Here you have a series of claps, so I'm going to check the first one. This is how I'm going to do. This is the process. This is the process. And as you can see, I quickly jump to the next iteration of that sentence to just check that it starts with the same words. If so, I'm going to quickly remove the entire part. And in general, when I'm working with live footage in particular, I will check the cut here. So I will quickly right click and drag the time cursor over the cut or play back really quickly. You linearly go through the video like that. We'll remove many more mistakes in our videos, small hesitations often like R or long silences, those kinds of things. I tend to go a bit overboard with that, but that's the idea. So you do a full pass like that, and whenever I feel like there's a need for some overlay, I will not stop editing. I will instead use markers in Blender. With the M key, I can create a marker and Control M to rename it. Then I will say insert a or clip of something. I do that for the entire video, and when I'm done editing, then especially if I have to go online to gather these clips or take shots of certain websites, screenshots, etc., I will do them all at once and I will insert them all at once on the edit. And that's how you manage to stay productive doing that. The editing process, if you are making a documentary or something, it can be quite creative. For tutorials, not so much. It's mostly linear. Depends. Sometimes you can do a bit of motion design or things like these, but it's fairly linear. So you want to go through the entire footage. I typically work sped up with our frame skipping here in Blender, which is part of the reason why we use Blender, because you can have continuous playback while you are editing your video, which just makes it faster than any other tool for this purpose, for editing tutorials like these, along with our tools, which allow us to quickly cut and trim footage. But there you go, that's the gist of it. Okay, so that was the main idea. I hope that some tips are useful for you. I think that regardless of the type of video you're going to create, if you want to become a content creator, if you want to create good videos for YouTube, if you want to make devlogs for your games, these tips can be useful. This video is a fairly quick one. I wanted to make it as soon as possible for my teammates, so that's why. There would be a lot more to say, of course, diving in the details, talking about how to edit a bit more precisely, those kinds of things. But I want to ask you, what are your extra tips you know, if you make videos or if you have extra questions as well. For the time being, I'm going to thank you kindly for watching. Be creative, have fun. Let's see one another in the next one. Bye bye.